Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of Craig Houston Talks To, and this is a special edition where I'm back to the roots of the channel where I have two interview guests this time. And the topic is quite a touchy subject, but very important topic right now because we're dealing with the Assisted Dying Act, as some call it and some refer to it by another name. But what I will say before we introduce the guests, the topic is very much a sticky one for platforms like YouTube. So there might be some terminology that we have to adjust slightly to enable this to receive as many people as possible. So because of the topic, what I would ask, if it's something that's important to you and you want others to see this video, then please hit the like, hit the share, and put plenty of comments below. And that will also help the algorithm to put it in front of as many people as possible. So I'd like to say hello to Amanda and George. How are you guys?
Doing very well, thank you.
No problem. So if you could take just a little time each just to tell the audience who you are and what your connection is to this issue, and then we'll go on with the hot topic of the issue.
Okay, so I'm from Families Against Involuntary Medical Euthanasia. I'm the co-founder of that group, and we campaign on against end-of-life protocol abuses. And we realise that the assisted dying bill, or terminally ill adults bill, is the official name, poses many, many dangers and could be abused. And we already see people being assisted to die by the NHS when they're elderly, they're frail, infirm. And we believe that this bill would actually lead to greater numbers lives being ended for that reason. And that's why we're against it, for many other reasons, but that's the principal reason why Families Against Involuntary Medical Euthanasia are campaigning against this. Can I also say I'm also here with another hat, and that's as the chair of Health and Social Care Campaigns at the Together Declaration, which is also running a campaign against the bill and has been very active in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yourself, George?
Thank you, Craig. I am a national disability rights activist and operationally have experience in social care, having co-founded and delivered operationally care to about 1,000 individuals. So two angles here: the disability rights angle, the social care angle, meant that this really wasn't an issue I could avoid. Everything I say in this podcast, I say in a personal capacity, although I am a leading coordinator of Not Dead Yet UK, which is the leading non-secular campaign led by people with disabilities that was founded by Baroness Jane Campbell and has notable supporters like Liz Carr and Danny Gray Thompson.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the bill itself, it's created quite a reaction across a broad spectrum of people that I can see. What have concerns of are from many different angles. But the first question I want to ask is, first of all, before we get into the bill itself, is the bill actually needed?
Well, I would say a bill is needed, but definitely not this bill. We need a bill for the revolutionary reform in the NHS, social care and palliative care, all of which are underfunded, all of which we have no plan for, and the improvement of those systems, and indeed an open, free conversation about how those systems are struggling and failing so many people due to unmet need is the conversation and is the democratic act and legislation that we need. However, this is being proposed as a solution to that, whilst also falsifying the idea and dignifying the idea of a good death and a dignified death. So the words autonomy, choice, and dignity are being co-opted to make it sound as if vulnerable people who, if this bill is legalized, will be coerced and will be denied choice and have their life ended are actually, but how this is being sold is as an individual autonomous choice, and therefore it's a choice that you take, which and therefore all this is really just the very, very kind of end of what our autonomous, individualized, and capitalistic society, and that's how it's being sold. But yes, so many solutions are needed, many issues on which we could all find consensus. But as a result of this act, people's lives are being ended, and people's lives will be ended under the state and under conditions of coercion and burden. But if you believe the language policing and if you believe the marketization of this, it's all a fabrication of what we want as individuals who have the right to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yourself, Amanda, are you similar view on that, or do you have any different opinion on?
Well, yes, I think
do we need it?
There is an argument, when people are approaching the very end of their lives and are in terrible pain, to bring in a law, perhaps, that would, in those extreme circumstances, would enable them to do that. However, this is not the bill to do it. This bill is so full of flaws. It's so poorly drafted. It leaves so many of the decisions yet to be decided. So on the many of the things that we are concerned about are not even written on the face of the bill, such as which drugs will be used to end people's lives. And many of these decisions will be made after the fact by ministers. And this will bring in secondary legislation, which we know can be changed quite easily. So one of the arguments of the other side, and the main campaign driving this, is Dignity in Dying. The other one is My Body, My Choice, I think is the name. And one of their main arguments is that, this is for people who on the last 6 months of their life, they're in terrible pain. However, there is no mention in the bill of suffering or of pain. And the amount of people who suffer pain at end of life, which is not controlled or only partially controlled, is around 4 to 5%. So if you talk to any palliative care doctor, they will tell you that in their whole career, and we work with palliative care doctors such as Carol Davis from ODOC, Our Duty of Care, and they will tell you that, in their whole career, in 30, 40 years, there are, perhaps a handful of people that have not been able to help in the end stages of their lives. And it's a fallacy that a lot of people are dying in pain, A, and B, there is no mention of suffering or pain in the bill. So in order to be eligible for this, you will need to have a prognosis, of 6 months. However, there are huge problems around that. Leaving aside the slippery slope, and we know what's happened in other countries like Canada, the Netherlands, and in other countries where this has been introduced, is that after a while there's pressure to have that extended to a year or to other illnesses that are not terminal. So, for example, you could argue that dementia is terminal, but not in the same way that cancer is terminal. And for depression now, they are pushing for this in Canada in 2027. Mental health will be added to the list of conditions that will enable people to end their lives. This is very, very dangerous. And I think that where we are at FAME and together is we would say that, I personally, from a personal perspective, am against the bill on principle because I believe in the sanctity of life. And that's not for religious reasons. I believe in the sanctity of life as a human being. And I believe that we should protect people from wanting to end their lives. We should be providing the care and treatment they need at end of life, and supporting their families through the process. Allowing the state to facilitate death is not the answer, for many of the reasons George explained, and many more that I can go into.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that I've got personal experience with. That was when my father passed away, and he was diagnosed on the Monday, and he died on the Friday, and he was in palliative care immediately upon diagnosis. So I'm aware that, without putting horrific words to it, but there are drugs and procedures in place to make sure anybody who is in pain can pass away with a bit of dignity and less pain, without putting nasty words on what that could actually mean. So we've already got things in place that take care of what's been put up as one of the biggest reasons to have this bill. It's already there. Doctors, nurses, palliative care specialists can help somebody passing in the way that this has been described. So that's why I sometimes think, do we need the bill, right? And when we're normally passing bills, it's laws, and you go, well, you can be arrested for that. Yesterday, we're just creating another layer of stuff. We've got a system at the moment that can look after those situations. So from that point, do we actually need more? Is there a need for the ability to have folk pass away that are at death's door, to be perfectly frank with you?
Well, I think I'll let George come in just to make the point that you're absolutely right. And in fact, those mechanisms within the NHS to help somebody in the very last days and weeks of life are in place. If somebody is in pain, the pain management is good. As I said, that in the majority of cases, 95% of cases, people's pain is controlled. And when the time comes that they are extremely ill, they are then sedated. Now, unfortunately, those possibilities, let's say, are being abused. And that's one of the reasons we're very concerned about this, because we believe it will be a cover for neglect, malpractice, negligence, medical negligence. And this is a point that Theresa May made in the Lords. Now, I'm not a great fan of Theresa May, but she was brilliant when she stood up and she said that this bill will be used as a means to cover up poor care. And that's exactly one of our main concerns is coercion. And coercion comes in many shapes and forms. And it's not just about, malicious relatives or doctors with, maybe ableist and ageist attitudes. There is also unmet need. So if you're not getting the treatment and care you require to enable you to live a life of dignity and, to contribute to society and have a fulfilling life, whether, that's months or a couple of years ahead of you, if you're not getting that, obviously there would be more pressure on people to end their lives, because if the prospect is, languishing in some hospital bed for months, or, without proper care, you can see why people would perhaps opt for this if it was suggested to them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Indeed, in every jurisdiction that this has been legalized, indeed they do opt for it. And in Canada, and indeed here and everywhere really, that this has been legalized, it will be quicker to die than get the appropriate support and the assistance that you need to live a fulfilling life. And that is why the bill we are discussing is the most disableist and ageist legislation that's gone through Parliament in my lifetime. There can be no argument about that, in my opinion. What we are talking about here is the ending of life at the convenience of professionals and the state. And what is kind of a confirmation of that is as the bill currently stands, unless it is heavily amended, and one of the key amendments that is needed is for coroners to have the power to investigate suicide deaths. Now, assisted dying deaths. Now, as this currently stands, we would have no mechanism to investigate malpractice, poor treatment, and indeed, how can you? Because the person at the centre of this story will no longer be around. The whole process and protocolization of this and legalization of this has one outcome in mind. And I don't wish to scare people, but that outcome is an obvious one. They are trying to create and design a process to enable people to die rather than support people to live. It's an assistance to die before we have assistance to live. Now that is why we've talked a lot about kind of the language policing and being careful of the language that you use here. There is a deep fatalism and negativity behind proponents of this bill because they do not wish to live their life anymore. They do not believe that you can be in pain, that you can be disabled, that you can be of any kind of minority or inequality and live a joyful life. It is our side. It is those that are actually trying to keep this away from the statute book that are saying, I love every human being that I am surrounded by, and I love my own life. And that positivity, that joy, that scares people. That scares people because what they fear is my life. They fear the fact, or they fear being disabled. They fear having a body that may not work, or may not work the way that you wish to, the loss of function. And you know, what society do we now live in where we fear our own bodies and how our bodies may change? And indeed, therefore, there is parallels, strong parallels with this and the gender critical arguments about why don't we celebrate our bodies? Why don't we support our bodies as we age? Why don't we have systems that enable us to have the supports to live fulfilling lives? Why are we wanting, psychologically and otherwise, to change our bodies and medicalize our bodies in a way that is totally irreversible? And you know, that it's a very negative and scary argument. It's the socialization of a horrible medical phenomenon.
Yeah, I think there was something that Amanda and I had discussed earlier on today that kind of hit me right in the solar plexus, and that was a mention of the financial benefit of bringing in this act and making it an act, as opposed to giving palliative care. And that then leads society on to a very dangerous topic. And how much do you value your life? Because that's kind of what you're doing the minute you bring pounds, shillings and pence into it. And I find that quite disturbing that that's even in any of the conversations about this.
Well, it is, and indeed, the impact assessment, the equalities impact assessment that has been published, estimates that this bill will save in the region of 5.84 million to 59.6 million for the NHS by its 10th year. But so £60 million in 10 years. This is it. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. Some people are of less value to society because they aren't productive enough. They aren't seen, aren't heard and supported to live active lives, but they are also more costly and inconvenient to society. Now, one of them, Amanda, mentioned a very, very, very good speech, and I have to in Lady May's speech, and it was fantastic. The majority of speeches in the Lords have been a cut above the Commons, but there was one speech that I must highlight, if I may, and that was Lord Brooks of Alverthorpe, right? And Lord Brooks' argument was, we cannot afford this. We cannot afford not to change the law because we're overpopulated and we cannot cope with the climate crisis. And he highlights that there has been a 25% increase in the population in 25 years. And from if you want the figures, and I'm quoting directly from his speech, there has been an increase in the population from 6.1 billion to 8.2 billion in 25 years. We have too many people. We don't want the people that are inconvenient to us. So let's enable the state to end people's lives. That's his argument. And it's a dangerous one, and one that we should all be caught.
It's basic eugenics, isn't it? And this has been
it's eugenics 101. It's eugenics 101.
It's been one of our arguments all along, is that what is driving this, they talk about compassion. Now, for me, the most compassionate thing is to care for somebody until their very end, not to end the life of the sufferer, but to support them. And the other thing around, for example, choice is another of their arguments that we've already mentioned. When care is scarce and treatment is rationed, which it is being rationed, choice is an illusion. And so, this is where, you get bean counters, in the NHS thinking this is going to be a good way to get, to bring down the bill. Care is already being rationed. And, in our conversation we had earlier this year, Craig, we talked about this. We talked about how health and social care was being rationed, how there were treatment ceilings that were preventing people from getting the treatment they needed and the care they needed, and they would be given an end-of-life prognosis months, possibly years ahead of their time. And you know my mother's story, who survived 3.5 years after her first, end of life, end days. They were going to bring in the syringe driver. They were going to make her comfortable. I said no. She lived 3.5 years later. My brother, who has stage 4 lung cancer, he survived 5 years beyond the prognosis he was given. Doctors do not, there is no crystal ball. Doctors are notorious for not getting this right. In 63% of cases, doctors get it wrong. The prognosis issue is a really key one, totally key, because doctors, there is no way you can determine when somebody is going to die that many months ahead. You can determine within the last days, a week of life, but not on that kind of scale. And they get it wrong all the time. And if people are being, told they've got a prognosis of 6 months, of course you're going to be depressed. Of course you're going to want to. And if you're told that, that there's a really long waiting list for palliative care, or there's a really long waiting list for, a care home in your area, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
And the doctor comes around and suggests it to you,
Yeah, and that's a key thing. That has been, if it's going to be suggested to people as an alternative rather than
under the bill, it will be, doctors will have they will have the ability to suggest this to patients, and even if they don't want to follow up on that, they will have to get another doctor involved who will do so. And the thing is, the problem, I think, and it comes to the rationing of care, is that what will happen, care is being rationed. What will happen is this: resources will be diverted to assisted death services, and B, people will the choices available will just diminish, or so. And one of the big key problems is who's going to decide whether this person's life can be ended if their request that may have been suggested by a doctor is accepted. You're going to have a panel. You're going to have a social worker, you're going to have a psychologist, and you're going to have somebody from the legal profession, but not necessarily a judge. And they will, all they need to do is hear from the doctor. They don't have to speak to the doctor.
Or the patient.
Yeah.
And, if you're going to have a panel like that, that panel needs to be at the beginning of the process, not when somebody's actually made the request. So people should be presented with the choices, what is available. They should have appointments with each of those departments, whether that's the mental health or palliative care or any of the, or for their particular condition, to talk about, what the options are. And they should have that before there is any conversation with the doctor about ending their life.
Yeah. I think when you talk about changing a law or bringing out a new law, you always have to remind yourself, where are we just now? Now, if this is all just about giving people the option of ending their life, because that's kind of where we are, right? Then that option's already there, however unpleasant that may sound. The only thing that's not there in current law is the ability to help somebody do that if they come to that decision. But for anybody who really did want to do it, they can do it just now. And it's a horrific thing, and it's a horrific thing to expect somebody to do.
It's a horrific thing, Craig. Sorry to talk over you.
Yeah,
but this is what we also have to say, is that when somebody does take that action, they are not in a position to often make a choice, and to call it a choice is an offence to any progression that we've made around preventing people to do so. Every platform, every training platform that you're in says, if you're struggling, call this number. If you live anywhere near Beachy Head, and there was an incredible speech from a lord who represents that area, there are protocols in place that they do not allow individuals, particularly young men, to go and ask for a taxi to Beachy Head on their own for that reason. The whole basis of mental health support and provision is that you can get better and your life is worth it, and it's incredibly hard, because we're actually speaking about an issue that a lot of organizations stick to neutrality on, although the Royal Colleges of Psychiatry, Pathology, all of them, whilst neutral on principle, are against this bill. But I softly say, if I may, neutrality on this issue belies and denies the very truth, which is that we are interdependent. We are not independent, and there isn't a corner of society that this bill will not touch or affect. And therefore, societally and organizationally, we do need to speak up a little bit more. But I think that is also what people are taking advantage of. You cannot discuss this issue without talking about frailty, without talking about death, without talking about unprocessed hurt and what you might have experienced. And we're not very good at that. We're not very good at that as British people, are we? So our silence on this issue is actually and our hurt is actually what's being taken advantage of, but by our legislators and by advocates of this this bill, because they know most people just want to keep quiet.
Yeah, and I think we're conditioned as a society, and I believe correctly, to deal with any other situation If somebody decides or is questioning whether they want to end their life or not, our default setting it should be, and it is up to this point, to say, well, let's not do that. Now what we're expecting society to do is flip that on its head and say, okay, let's look at the options available to you. And that's quite a strange way to go. And when you consider the people who are potentially at risk from changing the law, they are predominantly going to be elderly, infirm, or people with whatever list we decide to have when at day one of this bill, and whatever we change it to and amend it to going forward. And that's where you guys are discussing things like, disabilities, mental health, all these problems, and giving, worthwhile comparisons to other countries where they've eventually added onto the list. So then what we're saying as society is, see if you're fit and healthy and you want to end your life, we're going to tell you not to do that. But if you're not deemed fit and healthy, and whether that's through age or disability or an illness, then we're going to suggest it to you. And that to me is pretty weird.
Yeah. And so coming into that, yes, we discourage people from ending their lives. We don't see somebody on a bridge about to throw themselves off and give them a push. We do, as a society, it's our basic human instinct, and it's served us for centuries long. We do not, assist people to end their lives, and it's sending a message to society, as George said earlier, that some lives, and as you clearly pointed out in your last comment, Craig, that some lives are less worthy of resources than others. And less worth living. And this is one of the issues around end-of-life protocols as well, is that doctors are deciding whether your quality of life, as they perceive it, is worth living, is worth continuing. So you as an individual may decide that despite what's up against me, and as someone who has myself gone through cancer, myself as well as my brother, I know what that means. That you decide that, well, no, my quality of life is sufficient with those around me to support me through this, and I want to see it through to the end. And the other message it's sending to society is, right now, we as a society are having to fill in the gaps of broken health and social care system, which are not able, as George said, to even look after the living. And, we are saying to society, well, you don't need to worry about looking after your loved one or giving up work, to look after your loved one, because, the state can, finish their lives early, ahead of their natural death. And so we can, put everyone out of their misery. And what kind of message is that? This is, for centuries, this is a basic human principle that we care for each other, not just our family, but those around us, people in our communities, that we support each other. And we're back to not assisting people to end their life.
When the state demands obedience, justice dies in silence. Okay, and what we haven't, I think, realized or discussed is that we are only 5 years from COVID, which cost the state an absolute fortune, and that demanded of individuals that we change our habits and behaviors and on great scale. And we, at that time, legislation was an old very way of life just changed overnight. Now, and I think, if I may say so, that we've got in the habit of believing that whatever the states say they want to execute is good, but and right, and actually, so it's not simple. This is not a It is actually simple. As soon as you look underneath the surface of this bill, you realise what a wreckage it is. It is the iceberg. You're seeing the tip at the moment, but tips of icebergs sank Titanics and ships, right? But it isn't. We cannot be in a society where we just blindly say that's fine by me. What does that mean for democracy? And what does that mean for people that don't have a voice when those that have a voice are silent? In the Netherlands, there's 39 cases of people with learning disabilities and autism that had their lives ended by euthanasia. They are currently trying to legalize it for children. And so, that means basically parents can turn around once their child is born, realize that that child has a defect, and by the way, the state might then say even after days, it's kind of post-birth abortion. Now, I'm pro-choice on the issues of abortion, but that's what we're discussing, and there are many examples like that in Oregon. In Oregon, people with anorexia have died, and how they have qualified. And these people are all women, by the way. So there is a misogynistic air to this legislation as well. How these people with anorexia have died is the doctors have said, if you stop voluntarily eating and drinking, you'll qualify in a week.
No.
There's
something that's just come into my head. Well, we've been talking, and it's a scenario. It's a doomsday scenario where this bill becomes an act and it's not properly managed. But let's just say a scenario that you and I, George, were both a bit depressed, right? And I present to a specialist and say, look, I'm really, really depressed. I think the world would be a better place without me. What's my options? And they would quite clearly say to me, as long as I know I'm relatively fit and well, I don't have any life-threatening diseases, well, we kind of need to fix your head. Let's deal with that. But if you presented, George, and the thing went a bit weird, and people with disabilities were allowed this as an option, and you're just suffering from the same level of depression as me, you've got no other, life-threatening illness, and you presented to the same person on the same day with the same words coming out of your mouth, we could be in a position where they say, well, Mrs. Have you got what disabilities do you have? What issues do you have just now, George? Oh, yeah. Well, we could let you die, right? We can manage that tomorrow for you. How's that? And that's just a horrible situation. I know it does for you and me in terms of illnesses. Is that I've maybe got a couple of decades ahead of you. That I'm maybe got a couple of days. I've still got a good couple of decades of life expectancy on. But they would tell me no, and they would tell you, who I would suggest, reasonably a bit younger than me, who would expect to have a longer life than me from today onwards. Well, let's look at this option. We could actually let you end your life if you want, George. That's bonkers, is it not? That surely cannot be right.
What's happening in other.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, Amanda. It is what's happening in other areas of the world. In every area of the world, if I may say so, that has had this legislation. It hasn't been passed safely yet. But you're right, Craig. There's millions of people, myself included, that have lifelong conditions. They're called lifelong conditions because you will never.
Yeah, it's not life-threatening.
I will never get rid of my cerebral palsy. But every time I have another ailment, whether it be a pressure sore. Now, I've had friends that have died of pressure sores, right? When I go to the doctor, I want the thing that I've gone to the doctor for to be treated. I don't go to the doctor wondering whether I've got cerebral palsy or not. So because I have it, and if I may say so, I live a joyful life. Like, you can live a joyful life as a person with a disability. I've said that before, okay? But structurally in society, 1 in 4 people that live in poverty have a disability, and the very, very concept that drives disability. It is the society that disables people, not condition. It is the fact that I can't get on a bus without logistically planning it. It is the fact that when I go to venues, like I went to a church with Amanda on Saturday, I have to crawl up the stairs. Happy to do it, but society hasn't invested in giving people access and therefore inclusion. And what people don't realise is that we have the very, very basis of the disability rights movement is that everybody deserves freedom, autonomy, and activity in society. But we are not there. Structurally, we are living quite ghettoized lives. We still have institutions and residential care homes and all of these things that are branded as that are branded as kind of services that are over there simply for the disabled, right? Or the ill or the frail. And so we're not in an integrated society. We don't have that, but we don't have it because we've structurally not made the decisions to make it possible.
I think that leads into sorry, Craig.
No, carry on, Amanda.
No, I think that leads into one of the key issues here, that we're not living in a perfect world, and I think the people who drafted this bill, and the people promoted it in the Commons, we're told to believe that, the NHS is totally benign, that all doctors are benign, that all doctors believe in and uphold the Hippocratic Oath, that all nurses are angels, that there is no abuse and there's no neglect. And
the majority of people are. The majority of people are, but bad actors exist and have always existed and will always exist.
We're often accused of being anti-NHS and anti-doctor. This is not the case. But, as we've said before, Craig, there are, and George has just said, there are bad actors and there are good actors. And you only take one or two and you can see what would happen, and I think that the other thing I wanted to raise is that, and this is how we began. We looked at, whatever you think about the principle of assisted death, that this is not the legislation to introduce it. And that also keys into the naivety of those proposing this and promoting it, is that we live in we currently live we have to look at the economic, social, political and cultural context in which this will be introduced. Forget about looking at it in the abstract, look at it in the concrete and the practical. The NHS is on its knees, social care likewise. We have an ableist society, we have the protocolization of medicine, and we have ceilings of care, that people be denied the treatment they need. We've got an economy, as I said, it's going down the pan. We do not have the resources to even assisted living. We should not be diverting those resources to assisting people to die. A very small minority who are calling for this. Most people want to live.
Absolutely, and that's the way it's always been. And if I may say, there is a undercurrent of privilege. Okay, everybody struggles in their life. I've had periods where I've struggled. We all have. Okay, but if the only thing in today's society that you have to worry about is your death potentially in 10, 20 years' time, then what does that say? Because most people are worrying about how to pay the bills. Most people are in precarious situations of work, and modern slavery is on the rise, and many and I live in London. Most people my age are having to work 3 jobs just to pay the rent. Okay, and so. What a privileged position it is when you don't look at the problem you've got right in front of you in the present, but you think about what might happen in 10 years' time, and that is something that should there are problems to solve. There are problems to solve. The real problem is inequality, lack of need, dysfunctional services, and inequality, and the fact that actually, society and our democratic structures aren't working for people like me and the majority of us. Solve that, but don't kill off the people who are struggling, and don't get heard, because things die in silence, and you are certainly silent when you're dead.
What I would like to finish off on is just the single biggest threat, or the biggest single concern is probably the best way to ask, that each of you have about this bill as it stands right now, or what's the biggest single concern you have of where it may end up?
Okay, so I will say that my biggest concern is that this will be abused. The other, I can't separate them. There are other concerns, and they're all linked. I think it's extremely dangerous to invest the state with their power to decide whether to end a life. That should be for the individual themselves, but it's not for the state to facilitate that, because it will be abused. And I am very worried about what this says to society. It's very interesting, isn't it, that the family is totally absent here. No, the family of the person requesting the death will not be able to intervene, and they will not be able to contest the request. They can contest it if the panel decide that no, they're not going to accept that this person is eligible. But if the panel decide that that's fine, and let's face it, this is going to be a rubber stamp decision, because they have, as we said before, they have no need to speak to the person concerned, let alone or the doctor. And so my real fear is what this says to society, and the family is key here, because if the family cannot contest this and has no involvement, the family is totally being left out of the picture. And what will happen to that family when that person his life's ended? They will be full of guilt that they didn't try harder to stop it. And of course, they were prevented from doing so. And I know when I was prevented from trying to save my mum's life, what impact that has on you.
Yeah, shocking. And yourself, George, what's your biggest concern about this?
I hesitate to say it was a privilege, Craig, but I sat in a room in the House of Commons with Alicia Duncan, and I ask everybody to look up Alicia Duncan's story. She basically found out her mother had died via text message.
Wow.
So I simply ask and simply say, rhetorically and otherwise, is life worth living? And if society and the state say no, doesn't that undervalue the quality and the very principle of any state-funded support, whatever it may be? If this is on the buffet cart of life, and and you can always choose it whenever you wish, then whenever anything goes wrong, off you go. And therefore, I simply would say our democracy, our public services, and the way we value and look at each other are all at threat.
And I think, yes, can I just finish, Craig? And sorry to go on, but I think another point that needs to be really drawn out is that this will fundamentally change the purpose of the NHS. The NHS is there to protect lives, to prolong lives, obviously in the best interest of the person. That they're there to protect lives. It will become a service that is there to end lives. It will change the purpose of the NHS. It will fundamentally alter the relationship between the doctor and the patient. And we already know that elderly people they are cancelling operations because they are too scared to go to hospital about what might happen to them. And it fundamentally changes the relationship between the citizen and the state.
It does indeed. And I would simply say you can choose which of these H's you want. But the H in NHS no longer stands for health. Some would say it would stand for National Harm Service. Some would even say it stands for National Health Service, depending on how lucky you are. No, because it is about prolonging life and giving life to people, and joy and sustenance, and that's where we should be focusing our attention. I thank you, Craig, and I thank everybody who engages in this debate, but it isn't the debate we should be having. And how sad it is, because I really, really, really want to be dedicating my time to talking about why the hell it is that only a third of palliative care is state funded. I really, really want to be talking to everybody about how there are waiting lists for mental health services, cancer services, and how people do die without the support that they need and do die in pain, and what a travesty that is. That's the conversation we should be having. But this is currently the conversation that people want to have. So let's have it. And let's say this is never going to be the solution. And, fear and hurt are something we all experience. And that's a human emotion. But eugenics is never the answer to fear.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great way of ending the discussion, to be honest with you. So all I can say to you guys before I wrap up is thanks very much for your time. I think it's been most educational, it's enlightening and worrying that what might happen. So thank you very much, guys, for taking part in this, and I hope plenty of people watch it and, more importantly, start discussing it, because I kind of think that's the aim of it, putting this podcast out.
Thank you, Craig. Can I just mention the mass lobby of Holyrood on the 7th of October? We really encourage people in Scotland to go down and make their voices heard. And we have a link that we share.
There's a link there coming across the bottom of the screen, and I'll also put it in the description for anybody that wants more details on that. George, were you going to say something there?
We're incredibly, incredibly grateful, Craig. But to speak to Amanda's point, there's similar legislation going through in the Isle of Man, in Jersey, and in Scotland. Now, in Liverpool, no, in the Isle of Man, there's no oncology services, so it'll be oncologists in Liverpool signing off on deaths of people in the Isle of Man. Similarly, in Southampton for people that live in Jersey, and indeed there is a risk that there is duplications and differences in legislation in Scotland and in England, and indeed as it currently stands, my trusted friends say the legislation in Scotland is even worse than the one in England, if that is indeed possible. So cross-border transfer of the provision of death is an issue that we need to discuss. And so get yourself to Holyrood on the 7th of October.
Yeah, and I'll try and get myself to Holyrood in May 2026 and do what I can, if it's not already
absolutely
by then for Scotland. So
I wish I could be there.
Guys. I'll speak to you soon. So, audience, what a fascinating discussion, what an eye-opening discussion and a worrying discussion. And as I've been going through this discussion and things going through my own mind, it's left me most concerned, because we always need to decide who benefits and why. And I think it's very evident that a few things, the whys, well, it saves money, and it'll take people out of society who are nothing more than an expense and a cost to certain people. The other thing we need to consider, as we touched on at the end there, is this is happening yet again, where some strange legislation seems to be appearing in not just one parliament across the world. It seems to be popping up in quite a few and round about the same time scale. which I always find odd. And one thing that I can't dismiss, and it may be seen as sort of conspiratorial to some, is the WHO. And there's only two people that I know that I have seen, because I'm not as invested in it as Amanda and George, but the only two people I've seen who have been driving this. And one was a pretty odd comment from Keir Starmer just after his election, where he said, I promised Esther Rantzen that I would at least put this on the Parliament. And that was a bit. And the only other person is Kim Ledbetter, who actually presented the bill. And as kind of conspiratorial as it may seem, it is factual and statement that both are Fabians, a group of people who quite evidently don't have you or me at the centre of their thoughts. And that scares their life out of me. So if you want others to see this video, click the like button, put your comments below and hit the share, because YouTube will not drive this one, believe me. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell and you'll be told when the next video comes out. But more important than all of that, unless you're the type of person that puts a monetary value in life and wants to allow some people who you may feel are as undeserving in society the ability to end their life, then not you, but everyone else, try and have a great day. Cheery bye now.